Do you feel like you're broken? Like something's not quite adding up? You did everything you were supposed to do in order to live a happy, successful life. You got the education, you got the job, you've got the relationship, but yet things just aren't working out the way that you hoped they would. You're not feeling like you're where you should be. Well, I've got some good news for you. That feeling, it's actually pretty normal. And therapists, I'm an executive counselor, we're seeing more and more of it in our offices every single day. You're not the problem. Our guest on this edition of the Being Human podcast is Matt Hussey. Matt is a former journalist turned therapist, and now he combines those two professions, and he writes about the dark corners of mental health that no one else is talking about. In this episode, he goes in depth about what he's seeing in the therapy room and what he thinks is going on. And again, the problem's not you, it's the way society is set up and how as individuals, we're becoming increasingly siloed and alone with our phones, alone with our screens and technology. And towards the end of the interview, he offers a solution that's been helping many of his clients. So make sure you subscribe, stay tuned to the end of this video. My name is Lisa Oak, I'm an executive counselor, and this is the Being Human podcast. What are you seeing? What are people struggling with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I see a lot of struggling with the idea that people feel that they're broken, right? Because and people think they're broken for all kinds of reasons. They feel they're broken because they can't maintain relationships. They feel broken because they can't do a 12-hour working day, then go and have hobbies and go and maintain friendships and go and maintain relationships and have a side hustle and go be creative and do all this kind of stuff. I see people struggle with sexual identity and you know the way the world is at the moment. Sexual identity is now a very contested and political idea, and I see a lot of people really struggling to put a finger on. There is nothing what they would describe as like clearly wrong with their world, right? They haven't suffered extreme loss. They haven't had a clinical psychological break of any meaningful kind. They're able to maintain relationships. They're able to go to work every day, but they don't feel very good about themselves. And there is this sort of, what I see a lot in the people who sit in front of me is kind of searching for why. Why is it that I am, on the one hand, fine, you know, like if someone were to ask me what was wrong, I couldn't really say explicitly what it was.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I have consistent low mood. I'm lethargic. I often self-soothe through either food or drugs, alcohol, or any sort of risk-seeking behavior. I can see all that, but no one seems to be able to articulate why that's happening to me.
What do you think? Why do you think it's happening?
I think it's happening because I think and I'm going to sort of zoom out a little bit to try and help sort of clarify this. So I think the way that we work as a species is the norms and values of the previous generation get taught to the new generation, right? So having children, you give them the norms and values of your generation, and then they go out and try and make it work. And so if I was giving an example of that, so my parents came from a world where they're very working class when they began life. You know, my dad's parents, he was a docker and his mother was a nurse. My mother's parents he was a fisherman and she was unemployed. And when they went out into the world of work, what they had was a really good social security system, healthcare that really worked. Higher education was free at that time. They didn't go to university, but they could if they wanted to. And they had a level of job security that doesn't exist anymore. So my parents, by the time they were 25 years old, had 3 children. They owned their own house.
Yeah.
They had 2 cars. We went on a 2-week holiday every summer. Yes, just in England, right? But they could sustain a family of 5 on essentially 1 salary. And I think that level of stability doesn't exist anymore. Like my dad, he started out repairing photocopiers. He got a job at IBM when it came to the UK, and he started as an engineer. He moved into sort of sales. And he was there for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that created an opportunity for the 3 of us to go, me, my brother, my sister, to go and do whatever we wanted, right? To travel, to go to university. My brother was the first person ever to go to university. So we took on all the ideals of what they had, right? Go and work hard, study, do all these things, and there will be a life for you waiting. I don't think that exists anymore. If I stayed in journalism, I don't think I would be able to stay I live in London. I wouldn't be able to live here. I wouldn't be able to afford to live here. I don't have any children, and if I had children, it would make it even harder. I haven't ever stayed in a job longer than 3 years, right? So you can't build up that kind of equity in a company. All my colleagues from journalism all left or went into advertising or marketing or PR, and I think in parallel, it's not just sort of job security, but I think what we feel the world is like now feels way more unstable. Now, obviously, the 80s were very turbulent, and the 9/11 was incredibly life-changing. But there was an academic I saw who gave I think a really elegant description of it, and he said, as people, we're designed to live in a world that is globally unstable but locally stable.
It's nice.
But he said what's happened now is the world and your local world feels unstable, right? So on the one hand, you have immediate threats to your security, job security, affordability, cost of living, that kind of stuff. And then the other, you have a kind of really felt sense of the world not going very well, because we're constantly shown the world isn't doing very well through whatever medium you take your news from. And I think that creates a sense of powerlessness, because when you turn on the TV every day and you see very powerful people doing terrible things, or you see climate change, or you see the suffering of people in far-flung destinations, there is a real sense of, well, I can't do anything to solve that. So I'm holding all the feelings about that, but none of the agency to do anything about it. And so what people have, I think, to do to cope with that is they retreat. Smaller, and they do less, and they want less, and they experience less, because this is such an overwhelm with, I think, how people feel. And I see it all the time in clients and in other therapists. And I think like lots of these sort of factors have kind of compounded together to create a world that feels scary, unsettling, insecure, and hyper individualized. Like it's just me on my own, and I'm the captain of a ship of one. I'm not in a community anymore. I'm not in a village. I'm not in a group. Like I think that has added an extra layer where we talked about it all throughout the 20th century, the kind of decline of civic spaces. That's just continued at a pace that I don't think anyone really expected. And when I talk to people and you look at the data, and you mentioned before we started, you talk to a therapist about the plight of men. That plight of men where they're more isolated, more alone, but also society says to them they should behave a certain way. I think is just magnified and intensified, and there are so many ideas that are being kind of exerted upon men and women. Where do they go to feel good enough? Where do they go to feel like they're doing well? And I think it's quite a mosaic of stuff I've mentioned, but I think it's all those things, all subtly feeding off each other and then compounding on each other, and then it creates this sense of like I'm alive and surviving. But if you were to ask lots of people, where do they think they are thriving right now? I don't think many people have an answer.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're meant to be social beings. We're meant to be in communities, in groups, and sort of feeding off one another and seeing nice things reflected back to us. But
Yeah.
we're increasingly isolated. And then on top of it, you have all of this comparison happening. So we've heard so much of with social media and that's not helping either. So more addiction.
No.
Yeah.
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 If I was to make a bold statement, I think social media is the worst thing that's happened to civilization in a really long time.
Yeah.
I know that's a very, very bold claim, but like the impact of what that has done to people under the guise of we're bringing people closer together,
Mm.
creating this global village, right? I was a tech journalist for a long time, and I remember all the promises that were given when these networks first started, and they have delivered none of those things. They have made the world more divisive. They've made people angry. They've made people feel more alone. They've made people compare themselves more against each other. And it's created a universal sense that you're not doing enough. And it's completely destroyed our politics and democracy and
Yeah. So much.
handed over incredible power and influence to private interest.
So Matt, let's talk a little bit more about how that's turning up with
Mhm.
your clients. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
And I'm sure you weren't expecting to have a political conversation about this, but I think if we're not willing as mental health practitioners to look at our politics and the wider world that we exist in, we're missing an opportunity to understand something different. So the reason why, I'm very, I guess, political, if you can call it that, is because I think a core problem in mental health at the moment is we are hyper fixated on the individual.
Mm.
You go to a doctor, you go to a professional, and you say, "I feel this," right? And we are very, very concerned about the inner world of individuals, right? And rightly so. But when we are completely focused on you as an individual, we are often missing you as a collective, right?
Mm.
Your family, your relationships, your work, your town, your city, your country, even. If there are all these forces acting upon you, right, which are really hard to quantify and measure and to point out and go, this is the problem. We're missing an opportunity to address why people feel worse. Now, if you mentioned that we're very social beings, we're driven to be social. Right? So much of our anatomy is handed over to being social, right? To being interconnected, right? There was a wonderful study a few years ago that found like there was a part of the brain whose sole job was to feel another person through space,
Mm.
right? So, and what that meant was it was to kind of intuit the feelings of another non-verbally, right? And I think there's something beautiful about that, the idea that there's a core part of our anatomy is designed to feel another. So we're deeply social beings, but we don't look at what's wrong with people from a social perspective. We look at what's wrong with you from a personal, individualized
Mm.
perspective. And I think if we keep doing that, if we keep letting people define their own experiences, oh, I am broken internally, rather than I may be sat in a broken family or a broken workplace or a broken society, I don't think we're gonna solve what has been a persistent mental health crisis for over a decade.
Mm.
Hmm.
There's something about that feels so overwhelming to
It is absolutely, Lisa, and I think there's nothing wrong with hearing that and going, no, I can't deal with that, right? And because it's a really hard problem. It's a really hard thing to fix, and especially when our job is us sitting with individuals, week in, week out, trying our best to hold them and their experiences and what they're going through, while also kind of going, well, maybe it's not just them, maybe it's everything, right? It's a really hard thing to know what to do with, and I've often despaired at this problem, right?
And I will go through periods where I'll just pull back from the news because it's too much. You see the kids in Gaza. It's too much. And so the collective is important. You make an excellent point, Matt. But there are also forces, very big corporate forces, who have a financial interest in keeping us segregated in our individual silos.
Mhm. Yeah.
You posted an article about that I thought was amazing. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so are you talking about the kind of rage industrial complex one?
Well, the mining of our souls.
Yes, the age of emotional extraction.
Yeah.
So this came out of there's a British documentary maker who has been a big inspiration of mine, called Adam Curtis, and if you put his name into YouTube, you'll find he has made incredible videos for nearly 4 decades on exactly this sort of hidden links between things. And he was interviewed recently on a podcast, and he said that what he thinks is the primary concern of our time is we don't really know how to describe what we're going through.
Mm.
And he said, because we can't describe what we're going through, we can't offer an alternative to what we're going through. We can't offer a vision of what might be. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try. Hopelessly ambitious in my scope. And so I kind of sat with that for a few weeks and really tried to understand what I felt was going on. And what I felt was going on was, if you look at us through a kind of like consumerist capitalist lens, what is being extracted the most at the moment? And it's not coal or oil they of course they are being pulled from the ground. But I think the age of capitalism we are in now is to mine out you and your emotions and your nervous system. And what I mean by that is there are multi-billion-dollar companies whose sole purpose it is to keep you engaged in something. How do you keep someone engaged with something? Where you speak to really primitive ideas, rage, lust, loneliness, envy, pride, right? Almost sort of 7 deadly sins almost. And what I saw and what I see is a sort of digital world, and now that has now spread out into our kind of non-digital world, where people have worked out you can make money out of rage or lust or envy or loneliness. And the reason why I call it this, or the age of emotional extraction, is because seems to be a place where we are now finding ourselves, where multi-billion-dollar companies and extremely clever people are spending all their time working out how to keep you on a platform that doesn't serve you in any meaningful long-term way, but appeals to your emotions in a very, very primitive, activating way, in a way that can now be directly converted into money. So I was out with my wife last night, and we had a conversation about a very controversial figure on the internet at the moment called Bonnie Blue, right? And my partner asked me what I thought about Bonnie Blue, and I said, well, there's 2 things I think about Bonnie Blue. One is that what she went through before she became Bonnie Blue is obviously very traumatic, and she went through something very horrible because I think for somebody to look upon their lives and go, the only way I can see myself making money is to sort of completely objectify myself to the ultimate degree, I think there's a real sadness in that.
Give us a little bit of history. Just give us a short synopsis. Who is Bonnie Blue?
Who is Bonnie Blue? Yeah, so Bonnie Blue is an OnlyFans creator, right? So she is an OnlyFans creator. She's a sex worker. We want to call her that. She emerged about 18 months ago in the sort of public realm. And the reason why she emerged 18 months ago is because she did a stunt in Australia where she advertised on social media for young men around 18, 19 years old to come and have sex with her, like one after the other. And she would film it and they would sign away their rights and she would monetize it.
Wow.
She has refined that, and then very famously earlier this year she slept with 1,000 men in 24 hours.
Wow.
And she Channel 4, which is a British TV station in Britain, just did a big documentary about her and her life, and she's now back on the kind of podcast circuit. And when you listen to her speak, there is something so indicative about what we're talking about, which is she said, I make most of my money because people absolutely despise me. She said, like, women who see me and have very strong feelings towards me are the ones that amplify my message by talking about it, by sharing it, by sending it to friends, by watching TV shows that I'm on. And she said, we live in an age where that is incredibly lucrative. And even Andrew Tate, who I would not give any credit for anything, said something quite profound. He said, it is incredibly lucrative today to have 10,000 people really like you and agree with you, but 10 million people who really hate you and disagree with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, what I see in this sort of age of emotional extraction is people are starting to work out that if I make you angry consistently, I can make money out of it really directly.
Wow.
Which we've never really had before.
So your amygdala is being triggered. All of these reptilian emotions are being triggered, and mind, and they know it. So the longer you spend on a YouTube video with someone you absolutely despise, it's being monetized and it's being tracked.
Exactly that. Because what sits behind these social networks is a really, really simple logic, right? It's why billions are spent on AI. It's why Facebook has persistently hired and held 300 psychologists on their payroll for over a decade. Is their sole concern is keep you on the network, keep you logging in, keep you checking it, and that is in small things like the little notification bubble, right, which has with a number in a red bubble, right? That is designed intently to make you click on it, to look at it, to spend time there. When you use Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, any platform with a scrolling feed, what happens behind that we don't see is a timer starts every time a new image or video emerges.
Yeah, 100%.
And what happens is Instagram and every other social network knows your average dwell time on every post. Let's say it's half a second. If you spend fractionally more than half a second on a post, Instagram goes, well, you're interested in it. I'm going to show you more. Because my job, again, is very simple, keep you here. So there's this real paradox at the moment where it's a difference between stated preference, right? When you interview people about what they want social media to be like I want it to be free from all this stuff. I don't want to see all this horrible material. I don't want to be served people that I don't know who are making no angry plays. Stated preference versus intent, as in what people actually look at and stick on.
Okay. So, Matt, they're tracking everything we click on, even things that we linger on, and it's being monetized. And we are all just sitting separately on our devices. And that, of course, is impacting our mental health, and not in a good way.
No, not in a good way at all. And I think there's a great tragedy in that, or a great irony perhaps, that these tools of connection are actually doing the opposite. They're actually making us hate our neighbors, or not even talk to our neighbors, right? Like there was a really interesting thing in the UK. It was a piece of data which said, like, you know more about the people you share the internet with than you do who you share a street with, who you go and buy groceries from in your local store, or like go to the local coffee shop, right? The knowledge that you have, the bubble effect of social media is that you end up spending time with people like you, and then you'll serve people who are not like you.
The algorithm,
right? And I really felt that, like, sort of last year, and we moved home up to sort of at the edges of London, and I've been trying to make a real effort of knowing my neighbors, having relationships with people, because there are lots of different ages here, lots of different kind of ethnic backgrounds, and some people have kids, some people don't, some people are old, some people are young. Because I think for me, the way that we get seen by people now on social media is through your interests or through your identity. And a friend of mine who has kids at a local school, sort of gave me this really kind of amazing kind of demonstration of this, which was the school board wanted to pass a piece of like legislation for school kids, and I think it was based around the trans debate, right, which is a hot topic everywhere. And what happened was it created this real divide between parents, because the way they were told about it was through like a newsletter kind of thing. But then what happens is when they were all asked to come to an evening and discuss it in person, what they found was it was the same parents who they stood at the school gate and talked about the weekend or talked about the weather or whatever it was. And it was parents whose their children played with and they'd spent many an hour with and, really, really liked. And what was so interesting, what this friend was telling me, was actually said, like, when we got to see the whole person, not just their view on a single subject, it made it way easier to compromise, to explore, and to discuss than the way that I think the internet works, which is you, Lisa, have an opinion and I have the opposite opinion, and we're supposed to hate each other because of it. And I think that's gone on for such a long time, over a decade now. A whole generation of people have been conditioned to think that's normal.
Right.
And I think that's something we have to work really hard, to your initial question about the very powerful forces and companies who don't want this to happen, is we need to, as a collective group, a village, a community, go, do we want to let them decide what's good for us, or do we already know what's good for us? We know what makes us feel connected and in touch and known in our communities, and it doesn't require one of these. It doesn't require, like, we have all the skills to be connected already. We've always had them. So it's up to us to decide if we want that middleman to become between us and to be serving as content based upon its own selfish means, which is, I just want to keep you here.
So relationships are therapeutic. It's the relationships that bolster us and help us resolve issues that come up within the community. We need to get back to that. That's what you're saying.
1,000%, right? And another book that kind of helped me on my journey was it was written by the former clinical director of the Harvard Grant Study. So the book was called Triumphs of Experience. And so Professor Valance, I think his name was, he was in charge of this study for a long, like 30 years, like a really long time. And if you're not familiar with the Harvard Grant Study, it is the longest continual study of human behavior ever attempted. It started in 1936, I think. They took 200 Harvard undergraduates, and they said, we're going to interview you every 2 to 3 years to work out what makes a good life.
Yeah.
And the study is now on the grandchildren of those people. There were separate studies that were set up in working class Boston areas. There are studies that now just focus on women, because the first study was men, because only men could go to Harvard at the time. And what they have found with this enormous data set was the single biggest determinant of a meaningful life. So that is a life that has all the component parts of like long life, healthy, no sort of dysfunction in general faculties. The single biggest determinant of how well your life would go was the quality and depth of your relationships. That was it. And for me, that's always sat with me. And in the book, there was one guy they spent a lot of time talking about. So when he arrived at Harvard as a 20-year-old man, he had come from wealth. He was wealthy, but he was really withdrawn. He really struggled to maintain relationships. He was a bit of a loner. He was quite awkward. He's quite hard to talk to. And he stayed that way all through his 20s, his 30s, his 40s. And the researchers sort of made a bet when the group got to their 50s and said, who do you think is going to die first? And they all said he was. But then something amazing happened with this man, which was he had one really, really good relationship with another person. And it changed his life. And it changed his outlook. And it changed his health. And he went on to live into his late 80s. And for a man that, when one of the questions they would always ask is, how many close friends or close relationships do you think you have? He was always below 5 for 30 years. He died. There were 600 people at his funeral.
Oh.
He had become this huge pillar of a community because of this one relationship. Right?
Wow.
And he outlived like a lot of people in the study. And again, because what they understood through this research was like good relationships were protective against degenerative diseases, so old age. They were protective against mental health illnesses, so depression and all those sorts of things. And they are protective against loneliness and isolation and all the things that we know now to be so devastating to our health. Right? Relationships did all of that.
They do. They heal us. We heal through relationships. We learn.
Yeah. And for me, there is something so wonderful in that information, but at the same time, so forgotten. Right? So, like the idea, like, in my training as a therapist, what I was told, it was not the theory that healed them; it was the relationship that you gave them, what healed your clients.
Yeah.
Right? It was your ability to be with them that was healing. Yeah. And the data backs it up. Like Irvin Yalom, in one of his books, he's a huge hero of mine. He went and looked at all the studies that looked about in therapy, what was the most effective thing that led to the recovery of the client or the improvement of the outcome of the client. And beyond personal motivation, so a client's motivation to change, the next biggest thing by a mile was the relationship that they had with their therapist. That was the second largest determinant of whether therapy was useful and effective to the person. And then and I think it was like over a third of instances, and motivation was like 40%. The relationship was 30s. Modality and techniques were like 7%.
Yeah. Yeah. The trust.
The person to person, the interpersonal stuff. So we see it everywhere, and I try to write about it as much as I can, by looking at it through different lenses.
So what's coming up for me is, as you're talking about this, Matt, I agree completely. We heal through relationships. They're so important. We're sort of losing that ability in this environment that we're all sort of operating in. We're becoming increasingly siloed, but it's also concerning that younger people seem to be losing faith even in therapy.
Yeah, for sure.
And you've discussed this before. Tell us what you're seeing out there with the younger folks. And is AI going to take over from all of us therapists?
It's a big question. It's a big question. Yeah. So I see a number of important things. So one is that young people have become way more comfortable discussing their mental health in peer groups, right? So there's something interesting in that itself, but often at the expense of therapy. And the reason why that I've seen and of what I've seen in the data I've looked at is because there is a growing mistrust in what young people see as a kind of like mental health industrial complex, which is what they see is an industry designed to keep them sick, not to help them get better.
Mm.
And so for a growing number of young people, there is a belief that discussing their experience, their feelings, their condition online, in communities, in private Discord servers, private WhatsApp groups, is more cathartic than going and spending money on therapy. And as we know, therapy is an expensive thing to do, right?
Yeah.
This is not a cheap thing. And so for me, there is both something positive and something negative to come out of that. So in the positive for me is that young people are increasingly turning to communities to resolve their issues, which I think is a really good thing. But the other thing is that the negative thing is that the content inside those communities, and that we now have the data to show it, is wildly misleading, right? So on TikTok, something like 97% of influencers, mental health influencers, have no formal qualification in the profession at all. And then I think it's now the Guardian UK brought out something last week that said like over 60% of content on social media is just false. It's just not accurate. And so when you see that and you go, okay, so young people are really, really engaged in their mental health, right? And they have started to mistrust certain aspects of who delivers, solutions. They are kind of looking upon therapists going, I'm not really trust you. But then they're placing their trust in people who don't have any ethical or professional standards ensuring that the quality of advice or insight they're offering can be regulated, and which wonderfully dovetails onto the problem with AI that we have at the moment, which is a lot of people are using AI and ChatGPT and these large language models that are widely available, and and talking to them like they're a therapist. And I've written quite a few articles about it actually, and had some really, really interesting debates with therapists on both sides of the fence who see it as a great door opening, because it means that everyone can get access to high quality care. And I agree that there are not enough people who do what we do on Earth to serve everybody who needs support. But on the other hand, the companies that are building these tools aren't treating them with the same level of rigor in terms of the data, how they hallucinate, how they mislead, how they affirm people's beliefs when they talk to them. And so we're now seeing a number of really unusual things emerge out of people using AI. So an article I wrote about was the emergence of a new phenomenon that is ChatGPT-induced psychosis. And this is the idea that emotionally vulnerable people are using LLMs or AI bots to have conversations. And because of the way that these bots are designed to be supportive and affirming, they are affirming and supporting really, really dangerous ideas. So I spoke to a father of a boy. Well, he wasn't a boy. He was a guy in his 20s who started talking to ChatGPT about, like, asking these really big kind of philosophical questions about the meaning of life and, what's this all for? And because of the way that ChatGPT is designed, it will just keep talking back to you, right? And it's designed to be positive and supportive. And what happened is it started telling this man that he was the chosen one, that he had understood something about the world that no one else knew, and that made him very special, and that his job was to go out and to preach this gospel that he had discovered. He had a history of mental illness, and what these conversations did over a number of months is pushed him over the edge. And so what happened, his father, who rang the police because his son had pulled a knife on him, because he said that his father didn't understand that he was the chosen one and that he was destined for something far greater. The police turned up and they shot him, and he died on his driveway. Right? So that's obviously a really extreme case, and most people have very, very trivial conversations. But when we've introduced these tools, as we did with social media, and we were also quick to grab them, no one ever really asked, and there's a question I ask a lot, is who's making sure that these tools are not pushing people towards way more extreme beliefs, ideas? They are hampering their ability to self-regulate. They are causing them to withdraw from normal relationships because the ChatGPT is always on, always available, and always willing to listen.
Yeah.
So there's lots and lots of ethical challenges with AI at the moment, and I'm writing an article about the idea that it's about privacy and large language models. And the headline is, when you discover that you're teaching a bot how to give therapy to somebody else, which is, so I've gone and looked at all the terms and conditions on 10 of the largest chatbots being used today, and looked at what they do with your data. Most of them take your data and they use that to train the model. So your most personal revelations about you, are a product now. And the comparison I'm drawing is with a woman called Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks.
Tell us about it.
So Henrietta Lacks was a very poor Black woman in 1950s, 60s America. And she was rushed to hospital one night with stomach pains and other problems. And she died really quickly. And her family are very poor and didn't have any experience in working in the medical system at all. What happened was, when they were doing blood samples on her, her body was sort of full of cancer. But what they found in her cells was something really interesting, is that they never died. They just endlessly recycled themselves. So these cells became what were called HeLa, H-E-L-A, as in Henrietta Lacks. They were called HeLa cells. And the hospital that took the samples privatized and sold her cells. And they are still being sold today. Right? And they're used in labs everywhere for medical research. And so the reason why I'm using that as an example in this article is because we have all become, unwittingly, Henrietta Lacks. We are teaching a machine about ourselves, which is then being used and monetized and sold to give therapy.
So it's another way that we're being mined.
For sure. Yeah. And if you look at like I get contacted a lot by companies who go, we've done a really, really good mental health bot, right? It's regulated, it's HIPAA regulated, right? It's all very concerned with privacy. You go. And the first question I always ask them is, what was the training data you used to train your bot? And they very rarely tell me what the training data is. Because there is a very shady world where companies have bought transcripts from places like BetterHelp and other private therapy online providers who have sold your data to companies so they can train bots without your permission, by the way. So that's my news story, and so again, it's the theme of all of this is I like to go looking in corners that people don't like me looking in, because I think it's really important that we are able to ask these questions of these things that are being thrust into our lives, right? That, with Google's Gemini, every Google thing I open at the moment has gone, I've got AI in me now, whether you want it or not. All right. Like the other day I was searching for something and it said, do you want to do AI search instead of your normal, Web 2.0 silly search where I'll show you 3 billion web pages? And I was like, no, I'm quite happy with how I look on
Keep it the same. Stop with the upgrades already.
Yeah. So we're being told this is the thing that we already need. For me, being a little bit more skeptical about why we're being given these things and seemingly not having to pay for them is really important.
Yeah. So we're being, I can't even say gradually, pushed into corners and being isolated. It feels like it's happening very quickly.
It is.
And it's turning up, as you mentioned right in the beginning of our conversation. They're drinking more. They're relying on substances. They're numbing out. They're overeating. They're struggling with human-to-human relationships more and more as they retreat deeper into these corners. And we've talked about the importance of getting to know your neighbor, really going for the human relationships, as difficult and as messy as they are. And even though people say that we don't want to hear a lot of times. Is that where the answers lie? Going back, more relationships? Give us your view.
I do. It's in the article about the kind of the age of emotional extraction. I'm an optimist. Right? I don't enjoy writing things just to bum people out and then go, and that's me. Thanks very much. Over to you. Go and let that percolate. I always want to sort of try and say that none of this is set in stone. Right? None of this is fixed. These aren't foregone conclusions. For me, what I wrote about in that article and what I say to people now is there is a world out there that doesn't require you to use a middleman in the way that we're talking about it, like a digital kind of middleman. And then what I said in that article was, it was very personal. So like my wife has just joined a choir, right? So every Monday evening, she travels a few miles away to a church, and it's not religious, where people from all different ages come together and learn how to sing together.
Oh, sounds lovely.
And it is, because she comes back every Monday evening going, every time she's preparing to go, she's like, oh, I can't be bothered. I've got too much work on. I'm really tired. And every time she comes back, she is light as a feather, and it's
uplifted,
right?
Yeah.
And so I said, like, joining a choir, speaking to your neighbor, like saying hello to the person who puts your groceries in the bag, right? Like going and supporting a football team that never wins, saying to a friend opposite them, it's really good to see you, right? None of this is complicated. None of this is gatekeep. None of this is requires you to pay any money for it, but it means everything. And so for me, the route through all this is way more relationships, way more messy, annoying, difficult, trying relationships, because inside those messy boxes are the means to a really, really amazing life. And I spent 12 years in personal therapy, trying to work this all out. And what came out of it was I needed to be better at being in relationships, because the way I'd got to in my own personal story was I didn't trust anyone. I didn't trust my therapist for 5 years. Didn't know that until one sort of revelatory morning. And the reason, and my lack of trust in relationships meant that I never saw relationships as places where any value could come from me. And I didn't believe there's any value there. I didn't believe I could ask anything of people. I didn't think I was allowed to rely on people. I didn't think I was allowed to tell people when they let me down. I didn't think I was allowed to tell people that I needed things from them. And I was really, really good at being independent and self-determining. But I was missing all the really, really amazing stuff in life. The joy of being with somebody in any capacity.
Matt, can I ask where that came from with you? Where do you think that need to be so independent and trusting no one came from?
Where did that come from? How long have you got, Lisa? I'll try and be brief. So for me, my parents came from a really tough place. Well, they started life in a really tough place, and they had parents who were really tough, right? Very pragmatic, clothes on the back, food on the table. But anything beyond that was a stretch, and rightly so, right? Like my parents, my grandparents were born into war years, right? So the world was very different. So when my parents had children really early, they used the blueprint that they have been given, as most people do, which is how did their parents raise them, right? And obviously we all have parts of our parents' parenting that we hated. So we try and not do those and try and focus on the things that we thought were useful. My parents were very dedicated parents within the limits of what they knew about being a person. Right? That my mum had my brother at 20. So by 25, she had 3 children. That's a lot. That's a lot for anyone.
They started so young back then.
So young. They left home. They left their hometown. They moved to London. They didn't know anybody. They moved to a sort of suburb of London. My dad worked in the city all day. My mum was at home. They are the amazing conditions for lots of mental health challenges: loneliness, isolation, lack of contact, lack of identity. But they did their best. But in that, what came out of it was they would always make sure that we were practically okay, but where they struggled in their life, and therefore where we struggled, was the idea of taking up space, on needing things, finding things difficult. So the lessons that I learned from that experience was it's way safer and way easier not to need anyone.
Keep it all inside.
That's it. Find a way through it on your own, because that's safer. It's harder ultimately, but it kept me safe because I didn't have to deal with the pain of being let down. I didn't have to deal with the pain of someone going, "I'm not interested." I didn't have to deal with the pain of the inconsistency, where sometimes they'd be really present, sometimes they weren't. So the kind of like universal lesson I took from growing up was, you're on your own. No one's going to help. No one really cares. And in a way, it led me to be really successful in my career. I was really driven and determined and self-repelling, all the things, the qualities that we really value, right? So there are a lot of good qualities that came out of that. But like with everything, I think in life, the best of us can also be the worst of us in the wrong conditions. And being eternally self-propelling and independent in certain settings is amazing. In other settings, it's terrible because it means you never build bridges to anybody and you never maintain them. And
So in professional settings it worked, and in personal settings it didn't, I'm assuming.
exactly, yeah, and that's so the message that I try to give to clients is all the stuff you came for, that you were given, the blueprint for life that you inherited from whoever cared for you growing up. You will have turned a lot of that into a real advantage, right? So it's a really good part of you, but it will also be the part of you that unravels often. So if you are really independent, it means you will find vulnerability and intimacy and closeness really challenging. If you find being vulnerable really easy, if you find being connected really easy, you may find being independent really difficult. All right. So it's this thing of trying to help my clients see what I had to learn how to see, which is my independence is a good thing in certain places, but not in others. And that I had to learn to really identify what those weak areas were, being able to acknowledge that, and then having to learn what felt like from scratch how to ask people for things, how to tell people I was upset, how to tell people I didn't know how to do something. And I still find it hard. But with time, it's got easier and I've got better. And I think my relationships have improved as a result.
What was the moment in the 5-year mark on your therapeutic journey with your therapist that you realized, oh, I finally trust her?
What was the moment? I do remember it. It was, I got really frustrated with my therapist because I said, I've been coming here for 5 years and I don't think I've got anything. Right, the classic, I'm pissed off at my therapist. And my therapist was very, very gentle and very, very understanding. And she said, say some more about that. I'm sort of compressing the timeline a bit. But essentially what the revelation I had was I felt my job in therapy was to tell her I was doing really well. Learning and getting better. I didn't blow up that relationship or I didn't have that argument with someone. Because what I really wanted, I was desperate for my therapist, was a kind of someone to tell me that I was all right. Someone to tell me that I was doing really well. I needed to know I was doing well, or that she could see I was really trying. But what happened and what I kind of found in that exploration was I was so desperate to tell her I was doing really well, to show her how hard I was working, which was powered by the idea of I didn't trust that she would ever tell me that, or that she would do it on her own, or that she cared about me, or any of those things. And so I was so scared of bringing material that I really struggled with and I didn't have answers for, and I was ashamed of, that I had been trying to do this thing of going, I know there's this big black hole in the middle of all this, but I believed for such a long time that I could go around it and get to the other side of all the really good things that come out of therapy. Because I was really terrified of telling her that I didn't know what was in that hole. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to feel it. I didn't know how to deal with it. So the lack of trust in her was really a lack of trust in me, but I was giving it to her all the time. And when we finally kind of chewed through all this, I said to her, did you know that was going on? Did you know that I was sort of performing for you? And she took a long pause, as she often did. And she said, yes and no. I said, well, you're going to have to explain that to me, Denise. And she said, yes, and I knew there was something about you that you were really scared of me seeing. But I didn't know, obviously, what it was. And I didn't know what you thought would happen if I did. And she actually said, and this has stayed with me and helped me as being a therapist, I think, is she said, what I realized about this exchange is I probably should have done more to show you that I was there with you. To show you that it wasn't, you weren't doing this on your own. That you weren't just turning up in here and going blah, 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 and then leaving. That I was there with you. And she said, I realized that I probably should have shown that more to you because I think it would have been helpful.
So it didn't matter if you did well or not. She was going to be there.
No, and she wasn't going to push me away, and she wasn't going to reject me, and she wasn't going to like end the session, which I'd had therapists who had done that. And that was the real lesson out of it. And I use that in my practice all the time, which is I say to my clients, I'm not an expert in you. You are. So there will be things that I will learn from you.
Mm.
And there will be things that I will get wrong. And there are insights or interpretations I will offer you that you just disagree with.
Mm.
And I said, I would love it if you told me. Because I think that something that came out of 5 years of me headbutting this wall with trust written on it was that clients don't necessarily know what they need or can tell you what they need, but you can feel something is there and something is going on. And sometimes as practitioners, I think we need to do more to show our clients that we're aware of it. You know, rather than just be these sort of passive observers. For me, I'm a big proponent of being way more involved in my clients' world and their experience. Yeah. So that was it.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Very welcome.
It's such a journey, isn't it? Learning about ourselves and just engaging in things that we've learned from childhood, and even if it's hurting, even if it's doing harm to us, we all do it.
For sure, and that's the thing. I think the biggest lesson I've learned from all the things I've learned, both personally and professionally, is there is a really romantic idea that I certainly have, which is there is an end of this road of self-discovery and learning, right? There is some sort of finishing line that you'll cross, and there'll be no more things to learn about clients, about ourselves, about relationships, about life. But the more I do this work, the more I realize that journey never ends. But the difference or the shift, I think that's happened to me is I've learned to accept that. That this doesn't end, you know, and I'm not saying that like you should be in therapy forever. Quite the opposite. What I believe is if you can get to a place where you accept that you are not a static object, nor your clients, so they will change and shift as you change and shift, and that will create new experiences and new things to learn and new things to be challenged by. And that is unsettling and annoying and anxiety inducing, all the things. If you can find a place of acceptance in that, then you'll be fine.
You know what, Matt? I think that's a perfect place to wrap this up today. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your insight and your vulnerability and for sharing with us.
It's great to be here.